People waited in the rain in Sydney for the 36-year-old singer. Elton John arrived at the church some 20 minutes early, wearing his customary Beta, even today. He'd announced his engagement on Friday, and under New South Wales laws, would normally have had to wait a month before the wedding. But the authorities decided he and his bride, Renate, who's 30, were mature, responsible persons who could be allowed to marry straight away. Renate, wearing a dress of white silk, was a little late, but the wonder was they had time to marry at all. There'd be no time for a honeymoon, as Elton is off to New Zealand next week to begin a world tour, while Renate returns to Germany to work on a new recording contract. Such was the speed of their wedding that some relatives and friends couldn't get to Australia in time. So for their benefit, the couple are considering holding a second marriage ceremony in London in April.
And 4 days after popping the question to Renate Blaue, a studio assistant. Both the bride and groom wore white. The ceremony was in a Sydney suburb appropriately called Darling Point. Elton John decided against having any of his own music at the reception and opted for a Palm Court quintet instead. Robin White in London reports.
There was no sign of nerves as Elton John in his best shorts wandered around on his wedding morning, chatting to anyone he could find.
No, not for the wedding, for the band.
At the church, hundreds of spectators were waiting for a glimpse of the flamboyant pop star and his wife-to-be. Australia had dubbed this the show business wedding of the century. The groom arrived in white tails, a Beta covering those famous thinning locks, and was cheered up the steps and into the church. Then a handful of celebrities, Barry Humphries, Michael Parkinson and his wife, and others. Then the bride in traditional white. It's all been a bit of a rush for her. Elton only proposed 4 days ago.
Thank you very much.
Finally, the bridesmaids in what was called hot pink, ready to follow up the aisle. 30 minutes later, they emerged, and there was a big kiss for the benefit of the crowd and the flash guns. Elton said it had all been a breeze.
Public performances that you had to...
No, it was one of the easier ones, actually.
Why after all these years, such a rush to get married?
Well, I'd never found the right person to marry before, and now I have. And it was just a question of circumstances, which unfortunately looked like at one time that we wouldn't be able to. But everyone in this country has been so understanding and so great. And it's great to be married here, actually. It's fantastic.
Thousands of roses and white orchids had been flown in for the occasion, but the couple won't be together for long. Elton is starting a tour in Melbourne soon, and Renate is flying back to Britain to return to work in London.
Elton John and his German bride Renate were married in Australia. 1,000 fans waited in the rain outside the church, and the guests include singer Olivia Newton-John and tennis star John McEnroe. Elton arrived about 20 minutes early for the ceremony at Darling Point. As usual, he wore a straw Bota hat and he put on a white tail coat for his wedding. Renate Blaue was a little late arriving and wore a dress of white silk. She's a studio recording engineer who'd worked on Elton's latest album, and the couple announced their wedding plans only 4 days ago. The 30-minute ceremony was in private, while the fans waited outside for their first glimpse of the happy couple. Some relatives and friends in Europe couldn't get to Australia in time, so Mr. and Mrs. John are thinking of holding a second ceremony in London in the spring. Meanwhile, there's a short honeymoon before Elton sets off alone on a world concert tour. And that's all from Newsround tonight. See you again about the same time tomorrow. Until then, bye-bye.
Show business style on St. Valentine's Day at Darling Point in Australia. After a white wedding, Elton and his bride, studio assistant Renate Blaue, drove to a £30,000 reception in Sydney. The one thing he didn't ask for was his own music.
At least the church was traditional enough, but that's where normality ended for Australia's showbiz event of the year. Fans turned out in force, up to 2,000 of them, including one poor man who broke his leg in the crash, and others who weren't quite so excited. The groom certainly wasn't prepared to give up his flamboyant style along with his bachelor status, and turned up in the famous Elton John Bota, complete with a lilac ribbon and a bow tie to match. And he veritably bounced towards the altar, looking very pleased with life, and a whole 20 minutes early. Among the stars who could get there in time were Australian comedian Barry Humphries, and from England came the Parkinsons. Renate, the blushing bride, tried to make it a normal wedding, not only by being 5 minutes late, but by wearing a flowing white gown and veil with a garland of wild flowers pinned to her hair, a picture of conformity. The bridesmaids were not. And one Elton hit seemed just right for the occasion. But why, after so long, had the chairman of Watford Football Club decided to get married at all, and in Australia?
Well, I'd never found the right person to marry before, and now I have. And it was just a question of circumstances, which unfortunately looked like at one time that we wouldn't be able to. But everyone in this country has been so understanding and so great. And it's great to be married here, actually. It's fantastic.
French and American sources say